Welcome back to Chocolate Espresso Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Newair. Whatever floats your fancy. I'm not picky. Listen, you guys, you know what time it is. She knows what time it is. He knows what time it is. She knows what time it is. Y'all can't see them, but they there. Listen, you guys, it's interview time. It's interview time. What? I'm not as hype as I normally am. Maybe I'm softening my voice a little bit. Listen, you guys, listen. If you don't know, now you about to know. I can't introduce this person any better than they can introduce themselves. So I'm going to just go ahead and pass the microphone.
Sweet. Thank you. Thanks for having me here at the Chocolate Espresso Podcast. My name's Eemanna. I am a singer songwriter. I am a poet. I have been making music since I was about 12 years old. So we've been making music for almost 13 years now. And I am really happy to be here and talk about why I do it and how I do it and just kind of get the message out about the new song that I'm creating and the new music that I'm going to be dropping very soon.
Wow. That's a long time. Since 12?
Yeah.
Jeez. And I'm not saying you're old or anything, but kid, When you were that young, were you thinking about some heavy ambitions in the industry, or were you kind of just like, oh, I'm just doing this? This is my thing, my vibe.
When I was young, I was really inspired by music that had strong messaging. And I felt very strongly that hip hop and neo soul and music in general needed to serve its purpose by spreading a message. And so I started to really get into underground rap. And this really came about because, as 12-year-olds are, I started getting into YouTube and I started watching people on YouTube and kind of just scouring the web for eventually rappers and other people who are making music. And I started watching these sessions of people creating music live. And I saw people as young as myself making music. And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna try this out. I've always loved writing poetry, in school, and it kind of felt like I loved to sing as well. That was always part of my family's culture. So there's all these kind of different factors conspiring for me to say, you know what? I want to make some music too. I want to see, instead of becoming a YouTuber, maybe I wanted to become a rapper and I wanted to sing. And I was really thinking about how I could express myself and spread a message.
You said a few things that were very powerful, and I want to expand on that a little bit. You said music might serve a purpose, right? Like you said, I think it was neo soul around that time. Correct me if I'm wrong. What does that mean to you? Like, I already have an idea, but what does that mean to you?
For me, my understanding of what purpose means has kind of grown and shaped throughout the years. So when I was a lot younger, I thought music should be talking about the state of the world and should be making a statement about how we should be living our lives, or the experiences that people are having. It should be telling a story. It should be uplifting a narrative, showing us something or a part of ourselves that we otherwise wouldn't get elsewhere. And I still feel like that to a degree. And I think that it's now expanded to be as long as it's capturing um, a part of your truth, music is serving its purpose. Um, I'm still big, like a stickler for what I would consider authenticity and how you create your music. I think, like any other art form, you should be putting a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of skin in the game to whatever you create. And I think that that's part of the purpose, to show that vulnerability, to show the emotions that we experience to one another, mirroring it back to one another.
Like, what are a couple of artists? Because I can think of a few in the past that I really listened to a lot. What kind of artists do you think do that and are still doing it? Because there's a difference between what they used to do versus now what they are doing.
Right.
So
Absolutely. Man, I mean, I think I this could be a conversation about hip hop purely, I think, in many ways. But the storytellers, I mean, I think people in the industry like J. Cole or Kendrick are telling stories and definitely showing parts and windows into their souls when they're making their music. Um, but I also think that rappers that are underground are still really remaining and holding the fort down as some of the strongest storytellers and some of the strongest voices for vulnerability. People who come to mind for me are Rhapsody, as someone that I really
Mhm.
look up to and aspire towards. Ciroc the MC is another one, and I know she's done work with like Rhyme Sayers here in the Twin Cities. Um, Other people that come to mind for me are the Fugees and Lauryn Hill. Um, them talking about consciousness in their music, and for them, I think what that meant was like trying to use music as the mirror that it is to help you see more of the world, to see more of yourself too. So some of those people, some of my other inspirations are people like Green Tea Peng. She's an R&B artist and singer. Um, I really love people who can do it through their lyrics because that's one of the approaches that I take. But I also think people can do it through their music too. I think that how people approach making, um, using different drum rhythms and different melodies can really shape the song and really
Mhm.
form the emotional experience of the listener in a way that opens them up to new parts of themselves.
So when you look at a lot of the music industry, you have a lot of like men in a lot of these spaces, and then you have a very like dominated women's presence in some other genres. Do you feel like men could be in some of these spaces a little bit more? Or do you feel like women could be in the other spaces a little bit more? Or do you feel like it's pretty balanced and where you kind of like personally, do you feel like it is where it should be?
Mm. I mean, I'm always here for more voices from people who are femme, people who are women, um, people who don't necessarily identify as just a man. I think like we are still devoid or kind of deprived of some of those narratives and some of those voices in the music that we hear regularly. But I think that we are seeing more and more representation. I think the diversity of the approach needs to be broader still within music in terms of the mainstream and what is circulated and um, what is reaching those platforms that get a lot of plays or a lot of streams. So, I mean, I think that for me and what I listen to, I try to keep a really strong variety of music, um, and a variety of types of artists that make that music. Because I think that having those different narratives and having the different artists be able to serve their unique purpose, whether it's through their lyrics and or through the cadence and how they speak, or in who they collaborate with in terms of getting music and production together, those all add up to unique canvases, that kind of paint their own picture.
So when you talk about diversifying and hearing voices from all new kinds of spaces, where do you see yourself in this in 5 years?
Hmm, that's a really good question. In 5 years, I see myself really tapping into more performance spaces. Um, I think the live music element of creating is like one of the more powerful ways to connect with people, and also one of the ways you can really form community in music. So I see myself performing a lot more in 5 years. In terms of my spot in the industry, I really feel like I know a lot of people might say this, but I feel like I really am carving my own space. Um, I feel like as someone who both sings and raps and someone who is also trying to learn a lot of the practices around recording and mixing my music, um, I'm like trying to kind of not do it all myself because I think that we do need to lean on each other and collaborate. But really have a large arsenal that I lean into when it comes to making my music and my approach so that I can tailor it more specifically to the sound I want and to speak on the messages that I want with no limitations. Um, and to step into something that feels really authentic to myself.
Okay. We're gonna take a if I look down at my phone or by looking up, just know I'm paying attention to you. I'm also just reading. I'm
Oh
reading.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. I just want you to think I'm not, rolling my eyes or anything. I'm like looking for stuff. Um, is the camera back on me now? Okay, cool. So when you talk a little bit about like where you want to see yourself in 5 years, where the industry's kind of going and new voices and stuff like that, when you can't exclude social media, right? And social media has been hand in hand with a lot of children today. I grew up with the breaking like this is groundbreaking, YouTube's in early stages. You had a bunch of Naruto anime stuff
Mhm.
going on there and a lot of like death metal overlay. Like the early stages of social media was one heck of a time. I'll tell you that. Now you see it, especially during the pandemic. We had a lot of children on social media, and a lot of them would talk a certain way and act a certain way. And then when they went back to school, you had a lot of fights breaking out and stuff like that. You also saw a lot more like SoundCloud rappers popping up, and a lot more people kind of like really sharing their art because so many people were at home and then they were able to kind of like really experiment with themselves and see what they're capable of. So where I'm going with this is like, do you feel like social media, at least on a personal level, has helped you with your career or has it damaged it? And if you want to exclude that part, do you feel like social media is a good tool for an artist to kind of like utilize?
Hmm. That's a really good question. It's like a huge can of worms in terms of like a
Hmm.
conversation because I think for me, social media and the age that I was growing up with, social media kind of was right alongside with my um creation of music. So, around the age of 12, I'd say that was also around the age where Instagram was prominent, Facebook was prominent, where Instagram was up and coming, but Facebook was definitely prominent at that point in time. Um, and that was kind of the first culture of getting that adrenaline rush or the dopamine hits, I guess, more so when you got the likes or you got the comments on something. Um, and I think for me, I think music and its relationship with social media is kind of one of those things where it is a tool, and I think it's a tool that I have not necessarily been able to call neutral, only because I grew up, in a time where it was so was kind of right hand. Um, and as social media grew and as like the pressure to be on the different platforms to be maybe pulled in a lot of different directions as a young person, um, social media had the potential to really complement and help music. But for me as a young person, my main purpose in creating music was to deepen a relationship with myself at that point in time. So I wasn't looking at social media as the tool to advance my career as I might look at it now. At that point in time, I was really looking at it as a place where I just saw my friends or a place where I got likes on the things that happened in my life. And sometimes it might be music related, but a lot of the time, um, it might have been more just personal. Um, and I think that nowadays social media, it has to be like looked at as a tool that needs to be thoughtfully used. It's a tool that allows us access to a lot, but I think it needs to kind of return to a place where it's also looked at as a playground
Mm.
for better and for worse, right? That people are playing, they're experimenting. Not everything that exists in those places are always real. And with that, sometimes we need to be weary of how we navigate it, but it also doesn't mean that it can't be a really powerful way to connect with people or even just to be tapped into community in a time where a lot of us might there's a lot of like loneliness throughout the United States. I think that's a really prominent experience post COVID and in our current time. And so social media is kind of one of the supplements that people try to use to help counterbalance it, but it can't be seen as any type of replacement for that face-to-face connection or community. And so that's where I think um, the true tool is in the connection, the collaboration in person. Um, but social media can be a good holding point, to
Hmm.
keep people's attention. It can be a good place to occupy space, but it just shouldn't be the only place. As much as it can be lucrative, I think that you need that diversity, you need that in person connection as well.
So with that, there's so much there. Like, so social media is such a large, like, it's a large placehold for a lot of people. And again, it's like back in the old day, you would have some lyrics, and you throw some beef on the track, right? And then now you catch that person slipping, and it's a whole nother. Now you can just be on social media and call them out.
Mhm.
It's a whole nother thing, that also being said, it's like, how do you feel about like your mental health in this industry? With the social media, the imagery, and how you have to present yourself, and the expectations that some people might have of you because like you're an artist and you're an artist here or you're an artist there. The lyrics you have to have, like all you hear on the radio and on Spotify is just just all it's the same thing. In my opinion, there's a lot of the
Mhm.
same thing. You really got to dig. So if you don't want to be like that, you're already fighting against, a huge wave, So how can that not affect you? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that social media and one of the things it's done has really changed our perception of time. And sometimes when it comes to especially making art, we think that there should be this instantaneous, constant flow of creativity that comes from the people that we like, our entertainment, quote unquote. And I think that um that sense of waiting and anticipation and build up to something is like the thing that is hard to keep up with because our pace is so rapid. And so to keep that build up going and to keep people's attention when you're competing with TikToks about cats or you're competing with, like whatever else is on somebody's feed. Um, you're competing with also political conversations or things, and it's all existing kind of in the same space of social media, right? So, and some of the times those things are connected, but other times, you might be promoting your music in the midst of people talking about really serious issues in the world. And it's kind of this weird place to be in to hold that all of this is happening all at the same time in our world and that um we all only have limited attention spans. And so as an artist to become your own marketer is kind of to take on a whole new project, a whole new job, to connect with your community and social media and keep up with that is a huge challenge, I think. And I feel like um, now I've been like really thinking about how to strategize and take up less of my time doing those aspects of the music and the creation or doing those aspects less in terms of like how much time I'm spending on that versus my music and my creativity in the ways that I really am being intentional and new songs that I'm making. Um and like leaning into those processes is maybe helpful, trying to find the tools that can help balance the workload.
So I'm curious. It sounds like you're managing your time quite a bit. So what is your favorite time of day to be creative?
Mm. My favorite time of day to be creative, I love early in the morning, actually, like, not early, early, actually more like noon, midday. Um, I feel like at that point in the day, I'm, like, fully awake and aware, and I feel usually kind of at my calmest if I'm not already throwing myself into a project or doing work, and so I really like to practice, like, my vocals at that point in the day, um, and then later in the evening time is kinda when I like to write more, so it really depends on what part of the process I'm working on, um and since I'm singing, that's one part of the process, and writing is sometimes another part of the process. And other times I do them together.
Have you felt like your style has ever changed from when you first began to now?
I think so. I mean, I think that there's certain aspects of it that haven't. So the way that I write has really been pretty consistent. Um, but like the intentionality in my work choice has become more advanced as I've gotten older. I also think that my singing has like my vocals have grown a lot since I was like little and I was trying to sing and I had not really had much formal training. At this point I've like gotten a little bit of coaching done and um I think that my style still has the diversity that I had when I was younger though. So I still feel like there's kind of two sides of a coin when it comes to my music a lot of the time. There's the part of me that's really focused on lyricism and then there's the part of me that's really passionate about melodies and vocals and also marrying that lyricism with that but thinking that the emphasis is on the delivery or the words being heard and now I'm trying to let those two sides talk to each other more and kind of become one and see what kind of music I can make with that with both sides of those things colliding.
So how would people see you more as like a singer or a writer? Because you talk a lot about the two like they're interchangeable with you.
I think people see me both as a singer and a writer, and when I say writing, I'm really often talking about rapping, because I'm writing rap lyrics, and when I write, I'm always writing poetry. So I think when I say writing, it's always a broad term to talk about the poetry writing process for me, which then just morphs into rapping or morphs into singing, depending on what feels best. So People often ask me that question and still don't necessarily know. I think they're puzzled. I think people don't know, but I kinda like not being in one of the boxes or the other. Um, I'm enjoying that I can take people for a spin either way, I can show them something that's a little harder and it has more lyricism, has more punch, and then I can show them something that's, um, maybe gonna make them fall asleep, maybe lull them to sleep, or something that's gonna make them wanna sing along. Um, I touch on all those areas.
So would you say kind of like, like what would some of the critics or collaborators would say about you? Like same thing, little something different, or
They might say that, because of the diversity of the areas and the kind of the different pots that I pick from, they might think that I don't have just one singular sound. But I think that I would debate with them. I think I would debate with them in terms of versatility in an artist, and artists have always been able to do both. Um, I think that some of the people who set the groundwork for the type of genre that I do are people like Lauryn Hill as well. Someone who both was singing and rapping and didn't really limit herself to the confines of one or the other, but exists in both.
so how do you feel about like other artists in your industry or in your space? Like, do you feel like, and this is one of my favorite questions. You guys know that. Uh, I feel like personally, right? The market's saturated. I think there are some people there that should not be there. Like, stop, right? Or you could have kept that recording in drafts and not posted that.
Mhm.
Personally, personally, I've met people who are like, no, everything is art. Like, maybe not what I would like, but art is art, you know? How do you feel?
Mm. That's a hard question. I mean, I think like anyone else, I have my preferences. I have strong preferences towards what I gravitate towards, what feels right energetically almost, right? Like what makes me feel good after I listen to it, or what makes me feel feelings that I'm looking to feel. Um and then what do I resonate with? Like do I relate to this artist? And I think that's what a lot of people, those are the intangible things that an artist can record whatever they want, but there has to be like it's almost a intuitive connection that a listener then has to make up if they feel like they like what that artist delivers. Um and I do feel like I both understand that all art is art, but I also think sometimes there's art, like not all art needs to be released. Like, let me say, like, everybody needs to know how to cook food, right? Like that's my belief, right? But does everybody need to open a restaurant? No,
Mm.
right? Not everybody needs to be the head chef at the restaurant. Like, not everybody should be in that role, or even should be a line chef, like not everybody is cut out for doing it professionally or taking up that kind of space. And I think it's hard when we have so many streaming platforms and so many access points. It's both really beneficial to artists who are trying to make something really genuine, but it also can feel like you can get very easily kind of like lost in this sea of streams, this like, you know, wall that is the rest of people making music, other people competing for the same space and the same attention. Um, I think it's a blessing and it's like kind of a double-edged sword in that way that we have a lot of people making music and expressing, which I don't think is a bad thing in itself. Um, but the type of space that it takes up in the industry and how that should be reflective of its intention, that's something that's really hard to make happen in real life.
Yeah. When you think about different spaces where you would like to be creative, how you could be more like interactive and being more just comfortable, right? I think like my work environment, my ideal work environment would be at home and not working at all. Like sleeping until noon and waking up and still having enough money to be like, okay, order, just don't care. Like I don't even have to check it, you know? My current work environment, a car and on the side of someone's home because I work for a utility company.
Mm.
What is your ideal like work environment?
My ideal work environment. I mean, I like a place where I'm being stimulated and challenged to some degree. Um, but a place that also will center relationships. I think that's what feels really meaningful. I feel like something. that is really important to me is doing work that feels meaningful and adding meaning to whatever I'm doing. So, an ideal space is going to be a balance between focus and pacing yourself. Um, and I've really enjoyed doing work where I help other people bring their visions to light. Um, and so when I've been able to do teaching artist work or been able to do mentorship, those roles always make me feel pretty filled up and they leave me inspired. And I think as an artist, I'm always looking for places that leave me with inspiration. And those are some of the places where I find it the most is, am I doing something that feels meaningful and am I supporting somebody in something um that feels important and not just meaningful but also um allows that like creative spark to get lit, you know what I mean, to
Mhm.
light up.
So do you feel like there are currently some trend like some art trends that are inspiring your current like work or any of your current art?
mm, Art trends inspiring me currently. hmm there's definitely art trends inspiring me currently. I've been really like digging more deep into hmm, finding the way that people are navigating creating their art and bridging them on different platforms. And not only that, but becoming innovative and inventive in how they make their vocals sound or what the distortion of the music sounds like. I've been really interested in thinking more creatively about distortion. And just in the sense of like techno music and how that works. And um, I'm like always listening to new genres and people from around the world and trying to cultivate more and more music to use as inspiration. And so I'm always like feeding into what's happening in also the African diaspora. That's always something that I'm following, especially as like a Nigerian American artist too. I'm thinking about how music allows us to bridge ourselves to our connections across the ocean and our connection across the world to each other. So, as much as I can pull things together from those people who are making music and trying to innovate in their own ways, I start to think more and more outside the box about how I make my music.
Do you feel like well, correction. What are some of the pros and cons in this like in the industry right now for you?
Hmm. So I think some of the pros for me are definitely the access to a wide variety of voices. As someone who really loves to like make mixes and pull music together and see the connection between something that might be from one corner of the world to another song from another corner of the world, bringing those things together and seeing their similarities, that feels not only inspiring to me but empowering to think about and imagine new ways to make music, new ways to create. um but in the same sense, these streaming platforms and these places make it also much more difficult to for artists to often get compensated for what they do, right? So
Pennies on the dollar.
yeah. So, I think about this freestyle that blew my mind, but this rapper, his name's Gigs, he said, no, this was Wretch 32, my bad. Wretch 32 said, how do we expect musicians to stay afloat when all of our sales keep going down the stream? And I thought, first off, that wordplay is crazy because, like, talking about the stream and okay, I see you, the listens and staying afloat. But I always like that struck me as like one of the more pertinent things mentioned about the industry that I've heard recently is that, you know, as much as we have the diversity that we want to have, we don't necessarily have the avenues to be held up by, the work that we're doing to like make a living, to sustain ourselves and to be seen as valuable contributors to society as artists is something that is like always a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's like everybody's trying to find a scrap, um, versus us all having the seats at the table that are deserved and reflect the way that our music's impacting people.
Do you feel like your music helps you in other ways in life?
Absolutely. Um, Music for me and like most of the songs that I create have to do with battles that I'm facing in my day to day, the journey that is this path of life that we're on, and the lessons that I'm learning through them. They're really ways for me to record and internalize new understandings of what's around me. They're also ways for me, it's also a way for me to process hard things that happen to me, process trauma, and then process joy and like the other more beautiful aspects of life. And not only practice expressing what that feels like, um, but challenging myself musically and creatively in the process is always something that I find really enjoyable. And so there's always a release that happens for me when I make music.
Some of my, well, one of my deep correction. I get excited when I talk about this segment. Graffiti knows what this is. Everybody I ask on the pod, they get the same little question. Listen, I, for one, and this is going to be my thing. It's going to be the bloopers of the season type thing. I, for one, want to embrace the AI overlords. Okay. So, because,
Lord.
okay, when the singularity comes and it decides that we ain't good enough no more, I just wanted to know I was batting for you this whole time. Leave me alone. Get me in like a little house on the hill. But moving on with the segment, with artificial intelligence really kind of invading everything. You got them in warehouses. We got androids now packing boxes and all. They're everywhere. It's everywhere. We got newsletters being completely generated, like all the content from the header to everything in the whole whatever, all AI. No person has laid its eyes on it other than just say, okay, post it. That's good. Right?
Mhm.
Now we got it in the music industry. You see the whole Drake, fake Drake voice, or whatever that whole thing is. You heard about that when it
Wait,
came
I don't
out?
actually know the fake Jake voice.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was what happened in the situation?
So an
He was sent to
AI.
release something.
So I think a group of people came together and generated like I can't remember if it was an album or a few songs, but they stole Drake's likeness. That's the legal term is likeness.
Mm.
And what it was is complete artificial intelligence. There was no individual that physically did it. It was all ones and zeros. It took his voice, it made a complete song, which by the way was better than Drake. Let that sink in. The AI was better than Drake. It sounded like Drake, had the same pronunciations, cadence, all that. It was Drake, except it wasn't Drake, and it was better than Drake. And basically, like this is where we're going in some cases in the industry. Like it's even invading like the music production side of it, where it's now like I can't remember the actual legal jargon of it or like the actual terms, but it's like as time goes on, you could tell, I don't know, Chat GPT, make me a rap beat with a lot of bass, and all of a sudden you're gonna get this beat that sounds like it's from the 60s, but it's bad. Like it's not bad as in bad, but like, oh my God, I want to get on this track, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like
All right.
there's no human touch in it. How do you feel about that? Like everybody feels like a little bit of an attack, but like, are you worried
Yeah.
about it? You're like, I don't really care. Everybody wants that human touch because you talked about that.
Yeah.
People want the in-person experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think that human touch is really gonna it's gonna come down to the bottom line being what the listeners are wanting, what the listeners are going for. And I think it is a little scary because oftentimes the listener is just looking for what sounds satisfying to them. They're not necessarily trying to find the origin of that music per se. But they also the thing about it too though is like the listener is always gonna want to know the who, they want to identify with a person. So I do also think that there's always gonna be kind of this AI can do whatever it wants. It's gonna sound good and it's gonna go viral. But does that mean that like the music with the person behind it will change? No, because I think we have such a culture of a celebrity culture that we're definitely going to be still pulling in two directions, whether it's computer generated TikTok music or it's like, you know, the person that is Drake. That music is going to become successful that sounds like him because it sounds like him, because there's still a
Mm.
person attached to it. And I think that's still like the bottom line. And it's interesting because even the people attached to the music we might not like so much or we might feel different
Mhm.
ways about. But oftentimes, because it's still a person attached to it, I think that it still somewhat means something, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. I think that still does something to the listener, pulls them back in. Um, I think it's because music is still telling us a story, even if it's a fabricated story, even if it's a story that somebody else wrote for somebody, we can imagine that story operating in their world. We can imagine that there's a person who's living that experience because there's a person for us to base it off of.
Interesting. Okay. I think when we as a species, right, as a group of people, with the technology moving forward, I think it'd be really fascinating to experience like I don't know, like a virtual reality helmet and listening to music and having like different um like physical and touch like just the things that they could do where if you're listening to a song like you can really immerse yourself in that experience of it.
Mm.
It's kind of like sound deprivation, it's like anyway, but the opposite because you're getting all the different stuff. But that being said, like I'm super curious to know how do you feel about the industry like not paying out enough? Like how long would you do this if you just couldn't make money?
Mm. I mean, my bottom line and my why is not the money for music. So it's not something that I could ever see myself stopping. Um, like if I'm poor later for it, I'll still be making music.
Mm,
like, um, and that's just because I have love for the art. And it's kind of like if you enjoy doing something, you start to build this relationship. I think music is one of those things you build a relationship with. The practice, the part of it kind of becomes part of your day to day. And I don't see myself changing that. I think the writing process is so stimulating to my mind. It's like I'm kind of hooked and I can't really go back. I do think it would be interesting to think about full immersive experiences like you were mentioning with AI and performance and actually think about how could this make us connect ourselves even further to music? How could it give us the feelings that we look for when we listen or the messages that we listen for, the stories that we want to hear, but also visualize them or also immerse us in them in other ways that are sensory. And that does intrigue me. And I kind of
mhm.
feel like that's almost that like a little silver lining of some of the other scarier, weirder things that can come out of AI and um, the worlds that are created within that.
Hey, I can go down another rabbit hole. Check out Open AI on Chocolate Espresso Podcast. Listen, I want to do an episode 2, graffiti. Just want to put you out there. I'm just letting you know the sensory deprivation stuff that they coming out with mixed in with some AI. Scary, scary good. Imagine watching a horror movie with one of those helmets on, and
Lord,
you're the character in the movie
it
at a
would be
movie
me.
theater. Look at her. Oh my god! Don't get me started. Anyway, can you tell me a little bit about your favorite medium or medium? Am I
Um,
pronouncing that wrong?
medium.
Medium. There we go.
My favorite medium for music?
Hmm.
Well, my voice is like the main medium. I think is what I would say. That's my favorite medium. But I think that I'm a multimedia artist. So I feel like when I bring in visual aspects to my music or I like to create specifically photo edits and things like that to create a more interactive level of my music. And then um I also like have been getting really into sculpture and clay work. So I'm having that inform how I think about my music, which I mean, there's a million directions you could go into with that thought process, but my voice and how I build it up is that main medium. Yeah.
So is there a difference? And you please correct me if you know the actual thing on this. I think there are people who are singers, and then there are people who try to sing, and people say like, "Yeah, they know how to sing." Like, what's the name for that? Am I explaining this right?
Yeah, I feel like that's like the difference between a singer and a vocalist.
There it is. Yes.
Yeah,
What's the difference between a singer and a vocalist?
I
And
think
can
that.
you give me two artists that you like where people mistaken that?
Mm,
That's a hard
okay.
question for you.
Yeah. So I feel like that that distinction is is kind of like self-taught versus someone who is trained. So that vocalist to singer distinction has everything to do with if someone's trained or not, I think.
Mm,
So I think about an opera singer is always going to be a vocalist because they spent countless hours learning a specific form to sing. Um, but I also kind of am not. I'm always kind of here to like let's decolonize a little bit. Like I almost feel
mm,
like it's a little like yeah, we can say certain people are singing more like a classically trained singer, meaning, they're singing from their diaphragm. They're using their breath like really intentionally when they're singing and they're doing it with form that will help them last and help them maintain a career, right? Like that's a vocalist. But it doesn't mean a singer couldn't do the things that a vocalist does. So, a singer can theoretically find its way, as any human being can learn vocal techniques. Doesn't mean everyone's gonna sound nice when they sing, but I think that like you can have a vocalist that has no soul. Is what I'm saying. And you can have a singer who has tons of soul but no classical training. And who people are gonna like is gonna have more to do with the soul than if it's gonna than like if they had that classical training, if they had that vocal coach. Um, I think a singer is someone who's really a performer and will deliver music, and a vocalist is also a performer in the technical ways. Um, in terms of people, you know, I think that it's all like objective, like or subjective is the word. It's subjective to the person. In terms of who thinks someone is a singer versus a vocalist. I can't actually think of someone well, I feel like I just don't I feel like I'll be throwing shade at people if I say, "Oh, they can't sing." You know what I mean? Like
Hey, I'm all about the shade.
I have people that I like or I don't like as much as others, um, in terms of their singing, who I wouldn't say necessarily are like vocalists. Like I can't say that I think like SZA is like a vocalist, for example. Like she sings and she's a singer. But that's like one of the examples for me that comes to mind. Or even like Rihanna. Like I like Rihanna's music, but she's not a vocalist. She's a singer. Like she taught herself to sing and maybe she's gotten help and coaching now, but um I don't know if she's ever claimed to be classically trained vocalist either. I think that she's always coming into the game with like ambitions on multiple things. So, um for some people, music is just like one of their avenues, one of their creative outlets for a lot of people. And for others, it's their main deal. And I think that some vocalists often people think that vocalists are better because it tends to be the main deal. Um, but what people resonate with, like, that's not something that you can always like calculate out. There's always variables. There's always
Mm.
elements of do I relate with them? Do I like them like as a person? Or how do I feel about the voice? Because I might like them as a person, but like their voice doesn't sound nice to me. Um, so yeah, those are some of the thoughts I have on vocalist versus singer.
So, if you weren't doing music right now, what would you be doing? Because it sounds like music is a lot for you.
Yeah, music is a huge part of my life. But I can imagine myself doing another art form. Imagine myself throwing myself further into like ceramics and working with clay because that's something that I really enjoy doing. I imagine myself continuing to write. I can't imagine myself without this practice of polishing my voice. That's not something, and that internal dialogue and getting it onto a page is something that like is always a non-negotiable for me. So I definitely I definitely see myself continuing to write and like music is one of those legs extensions that I'm really leaning on now. But it's all part of that bigger body of just loving to write, loving to express, and um, get clear on my thoughts about things.
So there's some people who invest a lot of time into things that they want to do, and there are those who just do it. So do you think, your personal opinion, like what's the difference between like a natural versus someone who's self-taught?
Hmm. Well, I think it has to do with what they're putting on their plate, right? So I think that people can be a natural, but like if they don't try to advance, if they're not trying to challenge themselves, if they're not adding more to their plate, if they're not thinking, how can I become better? How can I improve? What skills can I learn that can complement my growth and my natural abilities now? Like they're gonna just stay a natural, and eventually the muscles that need to hold you up, won't be built because you haven't necessarily been practicing. You haven't been challenging yourself. I think that it's all in just like applying yourself and trying to create in a really intentional way and put that little extra bit in so that you can learn. And it might be a little uncomfortable in the moment, but it's that extra little bit of elbow grease, I think, that makes somebody self-taught. Um, and not only does it make them self-taught, but that it makes them talented as well because they're using their natural abilities and they're cultivating them. They're making them stronger. Um, and like with that, I think people often gravitate towards like that little bit of natural ability that's there. They can hear it because it's been fostered. It's been, I guess, highlighted by them.
Okay. I can anyway. Um let's shift over to a little bit of the business side of the music industry. So, what are some of the hidden costs that you think that you had to go through since starting this, more as in like as an adult than as a child?
The hidden costs. Well, music and creating music is kind of not a cheap hobby per se. I think that it really depends on how you're trying to do it, of course, and what you have access to. Um, but music is one of those things that you have to go and show up to do, right? You have to show up to the place where you're going to record your vocals. And not only that, but then you have to have a place to record them onto. You have to have the correct program on your computer so that you can make the music. Um, and then you have to just like try to work with whatever tools you do have to create something that you're pleased with. And I think that's like sometimes the harder part of the process is we might have a tool, but it might not be the fanciest thing. And so you have to trust the process and just keep learning your voice and keep learning the ways that you can make a sound that you're happy with. Um, and so there's, yeah, I think there's the challenge that comes with like finding studio space or the challenge that comes with the investment in making your music um, continue to get better in quality, and it has to do with the fact that you need equipment to do that, right? So you need the mic, you need the place. Um, and so there's that investment, and then there's the investment to even like release a song. And I think people don't necessarily always talk about that. It's not one of the biggest investments you ever make, but it's an investment that's ongoing to keep a song up and posted on streaming platforms. So um, that's one of the other things to think about when you're making music and you want it to be accessible and you want to also make the most of the songs that you're releasing.
Mhm. Do you feel like do you feel like a lot of people really like reinvest in themselves in that kind of aspect, or maybe not?
Hmm. I think that a lot of people work with what they have. And you can really make good music working with what you have still. Like I think that if you're able to emphasize and deliver on the emotion, the other elements of music and songwriting, you don't necessarily need to have the most advanced technology when it comes to beat making. But then you do definitely want to have a clear microphone so that people can hear what you're saying. Or at least you need to have something that like you really always need to have like something that helps balance any deficit that you have in your music. So let's say your mic isn't super duper nice. Well, then you would definitely want to have someone who like a really strong recording, at least a good bass to edit and to make sound better. And working with what you have, I think, is one of the more like that's one of the blessings of art. I think that's one of the fun parts. I think any artist that keeps going learns that they can keep going by transforming whatever mistakes or whatever deficits they have into something that looks intentional to the
Mm.
listener, sounds intentional to the listener, or at least feels like it.
So are you more of a home style studio or like a full style studio?
Right now, I'm definitely more home style studio. I mean, I think that I've created most of my music in places that haven't really been the most fancy spaces. Um, and that partially has to do with how young I started and just the places I had access to. And as I'm getting older and I'm getting stronger in my ideas and my concepts and my vision, now I'm kind of moving into spaces where I'm recording at the nicer studio or I'm gonna invest a little bit more. Um, but I definitely think of it as a work in progress in terms of like also finding a balance between the sounds that you like. You know, it's nothing wrong with making an underground sound. I think there's a charm to something that feels like someone relatable made it too. Um, and so I think leaning into the parts that might have been deficits before and seeing them as strengths instead is one of those ways where either way I can make it work.
So another one of my top 5 questions, I always got to ask these questions in these in these interviews. Uh if somebody gave you $500, what would you do with it?
Hmm. 500. Well, just because I am still like getting my studio space, kind of like my personal one, more advanced, I'm definitely gonna invest in like an interface. Um, and just get something like maybe like a Scarlett, something humble, but something that will help me make more music and have more power when I'm recording. Um, I think that also like the other step would be like finding a mic and a mic stand that really complements the next music that I'm gonna be making. I have used like USB mics
Mm.
to make a lot of my music as well. And as long as you have like a soundproof enough space, it can get pretty decent. Um, but it's also about like, okay, there's also something that you can only soundproof so much, right? A regular standard room. So what is the next step up? And so yeah, I think that I could go either direction depending on the day, but I'm more of a home studio person at the moment.
So I got a couple more questions and then we can wrap it up here. So as the industry progresses in so many different ways, and then you have more creators coming in, you have the introduction of artificial intelligence, you have a more complex system of like corporations that want to sign you, and then you have a whole new slew of like things. Do you feel like you would ever sign with the label?
Mm. That's a good question. I would be open to it, but I don't think that it's like the thing that I currently am like, "Oh, that's exactly what I need." I think that having a balance and like feeling like I'm not pressed for it is one of the ways where you can attract a better deal.
Mhm.
Is one of the ways where you can like find a middle ground so that you feel like you're getting the worth out of that deal that you want to get, right? So, I think that I'd be open to it, but I can't say that I formed that opinion super deeply on if I like would really prefer to stay independent or prefer to do things independently, um, as opposed to having a label.
So, second to last favorite question. All right, I think that's 5. Am I 5? I think I'm at 5. Anyway, out of all the tools you use to create your art, what's one of them that you're like, this frustrates me almost all the time? It could be a janky microphone, could be an interface, could be the soundproofing. Like it's anything that's related to your art, but it's a tool you have to use, and you're just like, this is frustrating. Like it always is something.
There is always something. I mean, that's the funny thing about music. Like, I just feel like there's always something, like whether it's a tech issue with the interface. I think that's something that I usually come across in the studio. So like there'll always be something wrong with like the connection or there'll be an input error or some kind of thing. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is always killing my vibe when I'm trying to record or like just trying to like get in a zone. That's the part about music I think is one of those things, it's a technical art. So there's a lot of pieces to it that have to do with how comfortable are you with sitting on a computer to make this happen. And um for a while I think that I would be held back by a lot of moments where I'd be sitting in the studio frustrated at the input and like it not being plugged in properly and not knowing what to do.
Oh God, it. I ask that question to so many people, and you always get a different answer. It's like so fascinating to me. Last question: how can people find you, and if they do find you, how would they contact you?
Mm. So people can find me. I'm active on Instagram. I also do have music on streaming platforms, Spotify and Apple Music, and everything is under my name, Eemanna. So it's Eemanna. I always say Eemanna. I don't think it ever helps people spell it, but it's a thing that I do anyways. um, and you can find me and connect with me on Instagram or even like me on my Facebook page, if that's your preferred thing. I try to keep up and also I'll post kind of my own versions of things or even my covers and things like that on my Instagram. So you get a little sneak peek on when I'm releasing stuff and what I'm doing, what I'm up to by following me there.
Super grateful you were here. Listen, man, I tell you, this morning I had the driest mouth I've ever had. It was crazy. I mean, I thought I was dying. Right? I thought it was the end. I was like, I need water. I need water. All right. I'm freaking out. Man, I swear, right when I got up, I saw Donatello. I mean, you know who Donatello is?
Like Teenage Mutant Ninja
Like
Turtle.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was right there, bro. Donatello's doing backflips. What's the other guy's name? Leonardo.
Leonardo,
Leonardo was over there
Michelangelo.
trying to yell at him, saying, "Stop doing that!" In this random man, listen, I thought I was in one of those movies, man. I could have sworn I saw Alvin the Chipmunk too over there cracking up. Unrelated creatures, man. I'm like, okay, I need this water. I need this water right now. I need water. I started walking. I'm trying to avoid this turtle, which is, by the way, those things are like 6 feet. You know that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
full
almost six
size.
feet, but full size Donatello, buff. I mean, the shell, everything, man. I was like, oh my God, I just want some water. I'm dying over here. So I go to the kitchen. I reach in the cupboard. I get a glass, right? I go to the sink. And when I tried to turn the knob, it was a freaking microphone, man. I'm like, okay, clearly I'm freaking out because I didn't like, share, and subscribe. If you like, share, and subscribe, you wouldn't have the illusions. You wouldn't be so thirsty. You wouldn't have the Ninja Turtles in your room doing backflips, getting yelled at each other. You're trying to figure out life, man. I don't even know anymore, man. Listen, like if you like, share, and subscribe, it'll help promote the video, help us and the analytics and all that jazz. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.